can say that Bion's interest in groups and their dynamics permeated his entire life, as he never lost sight of the importance of the inner group, a sort of set of introjected characters that we all carry within us, around which the mind gets organized. Such characters would determine a large part of the social behavior of each subject, for example, in the choice of people to live with, in the performance of certain roles, and so on. Bion's theories about mental functioning, while taking the position that the mind is unique, always present a vision of a group of functions in action. Bion expanded Freud's theory of group functioning by focusing on psychotic anxieties and the inevitable pressures toward the regression that participation in group life produces in its individual members. His experiments with groups began in 1942 at Northfield Hospital in London, working with the shell-shocked soldiers during the Second World War. At that time, emotional disturbances were clearly the most important cause of the military's inactivity. For this reason, the armed forces proposed rehabilitation programs. In addition to that, the army needed to increase the number of its officers, and the amount of candidates was so large that a more suitable method of selection was required. In this scenario, Bion came up with the idea of using the group resource. Regarding the military rehabilitation project, Bion carried out a plan of collective meetings at the hospital in which common problems were discussed and activity programs were established. Regarding the officer selection process, Bion set aside the usual method that prioritized the candidate's military qualities. In its place, he adopted the leaderless group technique, which consisted of proposing a collective task to the candidates, such as, for example, building a bridge. Meanwhile, the evaluators observed not the technical capacity to perform the task, but the ability to establish interrelationships, to face the tensions generated by the fear of failure of the task, as well as the desire for personal success. At the beginning of 1948, Bion organized his therapeutic groups, from which he made important observations and contributions that remain useful to this day. Bion observed that when an individual engages in a group, he regresses to primitive levels of functioning, characteristics of the early stages of mental life. It refers to the inevitable emergence of longings for emotional connection, as well as unconscious fantasies about the meaning of group life. The way in which each deal with such wishes can determine the behavior of individuals within the group, as well as its structure and the functioning of the group as a whole. In this sense, he suggests the existence of two organizations in a group which coexist simultaneously and interact dynamically with each other: the work group and the group of basic assumptions. The latter is considered in the group area the most original contribution of Bion, as well as being the most widely known. The term work group would consist of a mindset more adjusted to the reality and the proposed task. It describes how the group can be organized into functions, structures, and activities to fulfill its main task, which has been agreed upon by all members. On the other hand, the basic assumption group refers to the nature of the unconscious organization of a group in response to inevitable unconscious yearnings, anxieties, fantasies, and beliefs of group participants. These may include, for instance, depressive and/or persecutory anxieties, loss of individual identity, etc. Bion suggested three characteristic examples of unconscious basic assumption group structure: dependency, fight and flight, and pairing. The basic assumption of dependency shows the most primitive functioning of the group feeling the need for protection, for security, and therefore looking for them. As a result, the group elects a leader with charismatic characteristics and allows itself to be guided by his ideas. The basic assumption of fight and flight shows the group functioning dominated by paranoid anxieties, and therefore either the whole group is highly defensive and fights against any new situation, or flees from it, creating an external enemy to whom they attribute all evils and against whom, therefore, they are united. The leader required by this basic assumption group has paranoid and tyrannical characteristics. The third basic assumption, which is called pairing, consists in the fact that the group expects that a couple, a pair in the group will generate a Messiah son who will be the redeemer of all. Thus, the group's hope for a Messiah can be directed to a person, an idea, an event, etc., who will come to save them and make all difficulties disappear. The leader of this type of group has characteristics of a mystical nature, which somehow beckons for the fulfillment of everyone's dreams. It is important to emphasize that these types of basic assumptions do not contradict each other. On the contrary, they can coexist and alternate in the same group. The basic assumptions are opposed to change and growth and are always underlying in any work group. When not recognized and untapped, they block the group's ability to think and find solutions to difficulties. Bion was categorical in saying that psychotic anxiety and primitive defenses are the ultimate source of all groups' behavior. The recommendation that the phenomenon to be observed is the group as a whole, also referred to as the group's mind, thus removing the focus of individual members as well as their intrapsychic dynamics or clinical issues, is certainly one of Bion's main legacies within the understanding of groups. Although the concept related to the basic assumptions of dependency, fight and flight, and pairing was an original and widely cited contribution to this day, it is evidently not enough to understand the wide spectrum of unconscious assumptions that arise when working in or with groups. Significant progress in this field has been made since then. Briefly, we can quote Pichon-Rivière, Blagger, etc. All of Bion's writings on groups were brought together in a single publication in 1961 under the original title Experiences in Groups and Other Papers. This period of interest in groups can be understood as the nursery of ideas that will gain a fertile development in the following periods of his work.